Be me, diversity director. Been working in this field for 8 years. My job is basically making sure the company stays progressive and handles discrimination complaints. Pretty good at what I do. Won awards for our workplace equity initiatives. Grew up with amazing parents. Mom taught elementary school. Dad worked as operations manager at manufacturing plant. Dad always encouraged me to speak my mind. Never once told me there were limits to what I could achieve. He'd drive me to debate tournaments in high school. Waited in parking lots for hours. Used to tell me I was going to change the world someday. Fast forward to now, I'm living in nice downtown apartment, making 6 figures, respected in my field. Regular speaker at corporate conferences about workplace equality and inclusion. Last month did a presentation at huge HR summit in Chicago. The topic was addressing victim mentality in workplace complaints. Room full of maybe 300 HR professionals from major companies. Showed slide after slide of statistics, carefully curated to make my points. Got to section about baseless grievances that waste company resources. Mentioned how certain demographics tend to catastrophize normal workplace friction. Didn't say men explicitly, but room knew exactly what I meant from context and examples. Several women in audience nodding along, taking notes. During Q&A, some guy in back row stands up, looking uncomfortable. He starts talking about male suicide rates in corporate environments. Mentions how men who lose jobs often lose entire sense of identity and purpose. Claims the lack of support systems for men leads to devastating outcomes. Room gets quiet, people shifting in seats. I smile politely and flip to slide. I prepared for exactly this type of question. Explain that while any suicide is tragic, we need to look at workplace resource allocation through equity lens. Point out that women and minorities face disproportionate workplace trauma. Suggest that men's reluctance to seek help is product of toxic masculinity, not lack of resources. Mention that perhaps if men learned emotional intelligence instead of stoicism, outcomes would improve. Room laughs at that line. Tension breaks. Guy sits down, looking defeated, doesn't ask follow-up. After panel 3, women come up to thank me for not backing down. One tells me she's tired of men trying to hijack conversations about real discrimination, feel validated, energized even. This has been my experience for years now. Made reputation as someone who doesn't coddle or cave to false equivalencies. At my company, I've sat through dozens of meetings where men complain about feeling excluded from diversity initiatives. One guy in engineering actually cried during meeting about how reverse discrimination was affecting his career. Literally cried in front of 15 people because he didn't get promotion. I had to suppress eye roll, maintained professional demeanor. Explained to him that discomfort from losing unearned advantage isn't the same as discrimination. He left the meeting early. Heard later he transferred to different department. Honestly felt like I did company favor. Didn't need that fragility on team. Another time at dinner party with friends from grad school, conversation turned to family court. One woman's brother was going through custody battle. She was upset about it. Started going on about how system is biased against fathers, how her brother barely gets to see his kids. According to her, his ex-wife makes false allegations to turn children against him. She's nearly in tears, describing how destroyed he is by whole process. I tried to be sympathetic, but had to inject some reality into conversation. Pointed out that statistically, when fathers actually seek custody, they often get it. Mentioned that courts don't just believe mothers automatically. There's usually real reasons for decisions. Suggested maybe her brother wasn't telling whole story about why he lost custody. She got quiet after that, clearly offended. Our mutual friend changed subject quickly. Friendship cooled after that night. We don't really talk anymore. Her loss, honestly, can't have patience for people who can't handle facts. Had similar conversation at work about paternity leave policies. Company was considering expanding paid leave for new fathers to match maternal leave. During committee meeting, I argued this wasn't necessary or equitable. Pointed out that mothers have physical recovery needs fathers don't have. Suggested that equalizing leave might actually harm women's career advancement. If employers think men and women are equally likely to take extended leave, might affect hiring. Better to protect what women need than pretend biology doesn't exist. Couple male colleagues looked uncomfortable but didn't argue. Policy ended up being modified. Mothers kept longer leave guarantee. considered it win for strategic thinking. Throughout all these years, my dad remained my biggest supporter. He'd call every Sunday just to check in, ask about my work, would tell his friends about my accomplishments, showed people articles I'd been quoted in. Never once questioned my approach or suggested I was too harsh. I think he just loved that his daughter was confident and successful. Mom was proud too, but Dad had special gleam in eye when talking about my career. Then March happened. Dad called on Tuesday evening, which was unusual. He always called Sundays. Voice sounded strained, tight. Told me there was situation at work, nothing to worry about yet, but wanted me to know. Apparently one of newer employees had filed complaint with HR about workplace harassment. Dad managed a team of about 30 people at manufacturing plant, had been there 26 years, worked his way up from floor supervisor to operations manager. Employee was claiming Dad had created hostile work environment, made inappropriate comments. Dad insisted it was complete misunderstanding, said he'd never done what she was alleging. Told me the company was doing investigation. His boss said it was just procedure. He'd be on paid leave during investigation, should only take couple weeks. Tried to reassure him this stuff happens. Investigations usually clear everything up. Told him to cooperate fully, be honest, let process work. He sounded relieved to hear me say that, like he just needed someone to tell him it would be okay. Hung up, feeling slight unease, but pushed it away. My dad is good, man. There's no way any allegations had merit. Investigations are fair. I've conducted plenty myself. System works. 2 weeks later, he called again. The voice was different this time. Hollow somehow. Investigation was expanding. 2 more women had come forward with allegations. Claims were vague. Things like uncomfortable comments about appearance, inappropriate touching of shoulders. Dad swore none of it happened the way they were describing. Said he might have complimented someone's haircut once. Maybe put hand on someone's shoulder during stressful production deadline. Just normal workplace interactions he'd had for decades without issue. Now everything was being reinterpreted through sinister lens. Company had assigned him lawyer from corporate counsel. Lawyer told him to stop talking to former colleagues. Don't try to investigate himself. He asked me what I thought he should do. Told him to trust the process. Truth would come out. Said if he really didn't do anything wrong, investigation would show that. Suggested maybe he should reflect on whether his behavior might have been misinterpreted. Even well-intentioned actions can impact people differently than we intend. He got quiet on other end of line. Asked if I was saying he did something wrong. Quickly backtracked, said no. Just that investigations are thorough and he should be prepared for hard questions. We ended call awkwardly. Felt weird about conversation, but told myself I was helping him understand modern workplace. Realities. Investigation dragged on for 6 weeks. Dad called less frequently. When he did, he sounded increasingly desperate. His lawyer wasn't optimistic. Company seemed to be taking allegations very seriously. Rumor mill at plant had him already convicted, people he'd worked with for decades avoiding him. He'd gone to grocery store near plant and former colleague literally turned around and walked away. Told me he barely slept anymore. Just laid awake, replaying every interaction, trying to understand what happened. Started describing feeling of walls closing in, like he couldn't breathe sometimes. My mom called separately to say she was worried about him. Said he'd lost 15 pounds, wasn't eating. Would sit in garage for hours, just staring at nothing. She found him crying one night. First time she'd seen him cry in 30 years of marriage. Felt twinge of concern, but also slight irritation. This was stressful situation, but he was catastrophizing. Investigation would conclude, even if there were some findings, he'd get reprimand at worst. Men always think their careers are their whole identity, causes them to spiral unnecessarily. Then the call came that changed everything. Dad had been terminated effective immediately. Investigation concluded that while evidence was circumstantial, pattern of behavior suggested credibility of allegations. Company had zero tolerance policy, couldn't risk keeping him on. His 26 years of service, spotless record, none of it mattered. Security escorted him out. He wasn't allowed to say goodbye to his team. Retirement benefits were being reviewed, might be affected by termination for cause. He called me from car and parking lot after they walked him out. Couldn't form coherent sentences, kept starting thoughts and trailing off. Kept saying, "I don't understand," over and over. Asked me how this could happen. How could they do this without real evidence? Told me the allegations were so vague they could apply to anything. How could he defend himself? Tried to console him, but honestly didn't know what to say. Suggested he focus on moving forward. Maybe this was opportunity for early retirement anyway. He made sound I'd never heard before, something between laugh and sob. Said I didn't understand. He couldn't retire like this. They were destroying his pension. Reputation in industry was finished. Word had already spread. Plant manager he'd known for 15 years wouldn't return his calls. Hung up abruptly, left me sitting there with phone in hand, feeling strange emptiness. Over next month watched my father disintegrate. He'd always been solid presence, guy who fixed things, stayed calm in crisis. Now Mom called crying, saying he wouldn't get out of bed some days. Stopped shaving, showering regularly. Their savings were running out faster than expected. He'd been sole earner for years. Mom's teacher pension was small, not enough to cover mortgage and expenses. Dad applied to dozens of jobs. Nothing came back. Background checks showed termination for harassment, automatic disqualification. He was 57 years old, no prospects, industry blacklisted. Started having panic attacks. Mom had to take him to ER twice, thinking he was having heart attack. Doctor prescribed anti-anxiety medication and suggested therapy. Dad refused therapy, said talking wouldn't change anything. His best friend of 20 years stopped coming to poker nights. Heard through Mom that friend's wife didn't want him associating with someone accused of harassment. Entire social circle evaporated within weeks. Church group they'd attended for decade started excluding them from events. Mom and Dad stopped going to avoid awkwardness. Memorial Day weekend I drove home to visit. Needed to see for myself how bad things were. Walked into house and barely recognized man sitting in living room. Dad had aged 10 years in 2 months. Eyes were sunken, hands shook slightly. Tried to hug him and he felt fragile, insubstantial. We sat in painful silence for a while before he started talking. The voice was flat, affectless. Described what it felt like to have entire life's work erased. 26 years of getting up at 5 a.m., working through holidays, missing family events for work emergencies, dozens of people he'd mentored, helped get promoted, written recommendations for. All those relationships just gone, people acting like he never existed. Or worse, like he was always monster and they just never noticed. Told me the isolation was worst part. Said he'd never understood before what it meant to be completely alone. Even Mom looked at him differently sometimes. He could see doubt in her eyes. Started crying while telling me this. Tears just running down face while he stared straight ahead. Something cracked in my chest watching him. This was my dad. Man who taught me to ride bike, attended every school play, who paid for my college, called every week just to hear about my day. Sitting here broken, and I'd told him to trust the process. Tried to offer comfort, but words felt hollow. Suggested he could rebuild, start fresh somewhere new. He looked at me with expression I couldn't read. He asked if I really believed that, if I thought anyone would hire him with this record, if I understood they'd taken everything from him based on accusations nobody could prove. The way he said it made me defensive. He started to explain that companies have to take allegations seriously, that they can't risk legal liability, that investigations are thorough and don't end in termination without reason. He cut me off, asked me point blank if I believed he did what they accused him of. Sat there, frozen, unable to answer immediately. In that pause, everything changed. Saw realization dawn on his face that even I had doubts, his own daughter who knew him better than anyone. He stood up and walked out of room without another word. Spent rest of weekend in tense silence. Mom told me privately that he'd been hoping I would help him fight this. Thought maybe my expertise in HR and workplace issues could give him advice, but I just told him same things everyone else did. Trust the process. Companies do thorough investigations. Where there's smoke, there's fire. Drove back to city Sunday evening, feeling sick to stomach. Couldn't shake image of Dad's face when he realized I doubted him. Threw myself into work to avoid thinking about it. Had major conference coming up in Seattle, needed to finalize presentation. Topic was believing survivors and creating safe reporting environments. Had been working on this presentation for months before Dad's situation. Now staring at slides felt different. One section discussed importance of not requiring concrete evidence for disciplinary action, argued that overemphasizing evidence creates chilling effect on reporting. Another section addressed pushback from accused parties, suggested that denials and claims of unfairness are typical responses that shouldn't derail process, had included statistics about how rarely false accusations occur, how the real problem is underreporting, not false reports. Sat at laptop at 2 a.m., trying to reconcile these talking points with Dad's situation. Told myself his case was different. These principles were still sound. False accusations are rare. His situation was outlier. Except I'd said that exact thing to people over the years. Told that guy at Chicago conference that men catastrophize job loss. Told my friend her brother probably deserved losing custody. Told colleagues that men claiming false accusations are usually hiding real misconduct. Remembered the engineering guy who cried during meeting. How I'd thought he was fragile and pathetic for being upset about career setback. Dad was now crying alone in garage, having panic attacks, unable to work. Was that fragility or was that normal human response to devastating loss? Started going through mental catalog of every time I dismissed men's pain. Dinner, party conversation about custody battles where I suggested father was lying. What if that guy was telling truth like Dad was? Conference presentation about male suicide, where I blamed toxic masculinity instead of systemic issues. What if those men felt as trapped and hopeless as Dad did now? All the times I'd rolled my eyes at mentions of false accusations, suggested they were convenient excuse for men who didn't want accountability. Dad had been falsely accused. He was living nightmare of destroyed reputation anyway. Spent entire night going down this rabbit hole. Every confident assertion I'd ever made now seemed hollow. Called in sick to work next day. Couldn't face anyone. Laid in bed scrolling through articles I'd shared on social media over years. One about how men's rights activists were disguising misogyny as legitimate grievances. Another about how workplace diversity initiatives can't cater to male fragility. A thread I'd written about how impact matters more than intent in harassment cases. That last one stopped me cold. Had literally argued that someone's intent doesn't matter if recipient feels harmed. Exactly the logic used to fire my dad. He didn't intend anything inappropriate, but women felt uncomfortable. Impact over intent. That was the standard I'd championed. Picked up phone to call Dad, put it down. What would I even say? Next few weeks passed in blur. Mom called to say they were selling the house. Couldn't afford mortgage without Dad's income. Mom's pension wasn't enough. House I grew up in, where Dad had built deck and backyard and finished basement himself, where every doorframe had marks showing my height at different ages. Going to some stranger because Dad's career was destroyed. Mom's voice was steady, but I could hear strain underneath. She'd started picking up substitute teaching jobs whenever possible. At 62, she was working more than she had in years to keep them afloat. Asked how Dad was doing. Long pause before Mom answered. Said he was having bad days and worse days. Therapist he finally agreed to see was concerned about his mental state. Used words like severe depression and ideation. That last word made my blood freeze. Asked Mom what she meant by ideation. She started crying, something Mom never did. Said therapist was worried Dad might hurt himself. That level of hopelessness and despair was dangerous. He told therapist he didn't see point in continuing. Everything he'd built was gone. Everyone he knew had abandoned him. Felt like burden on Mom and family. Therapist wanted him to consider inpatient treatment. Dad refused. Said he wasn't crazy, just destroyed. Sat there holding phone, listening to Mom cry. Thought about all the times I'd heard similar stories about men in crisis. Custody battles that ended with suicide. Job losses that led to depression and overdose. Accusations that resulted in men taking their own lives. Every single time I'd thought somewhere in back of mind that there must have been something real there. That level of consequences doesn't happen to innocent people. System has checks and balances. Where there's smoke, there's fire. Now my dad was the smoke. And I knew with absolute certainty there was no fire. Just vapor and mirrors and people covering their liability. Started researching what happened in cases like Dad's. Found support groups online for people accused of workplace misconduct. Stories were horrifyingly similar. Vague allegations impossible to disprove. Investigations that assumed guilt and worked backward. Decades-long careers ended based on he said, she said. Families destroyed, savings depleted on lawyers. Depression, anxiety, PTSD, suicide attempts. Forums full of men describing exact same feelings Dad expressed. Isolation, hopelessness, betrayal by system they'd trusted. And under many posts were comments from people like me, dismissing them as liars, suggesting they probably deserved it, saying false accusations are rare, so these men were likely guilty. Felt physically ill reading my own rhetoric reflected back. July arrived and Mom called with worse news. Dad's former employer was denying his pension benefits. Termination for cause meant forfeiture of retirement he'd earned over 26 years. They were going to fight it legally, but lawyer wasn't optimistic. Pension was their safety net, only thing keeping them from complete financial ruin. Without it, they'd have nothing but Social Security and Mom's small pension. House sale would give them some cushion, but not enough to retire on. Dad would need to find work somehow, somewhere, but he was blacklisted industry-wide, approaching 60, and psychologically broken. Mom's voice when she told me this was defeated, said she didn't know what they were going to do. She couldn't work enough to support them both. Dad couldn't work even if someone would hire him. His mental state was too fragile. Asked if I could help financially. Felt gut punch of shame because I absolutely could. Was making six-figure salary and living alone in expensive apartment. Fancy coffee every morning, nice dinners out, regular salary going to savings and retirement. While my parents lost everything. Immediately said yes, I'd send money. Mom cried again. Thanked me. Said they didn't want to be burdened, but didn't know where else to turn. After hanging up, sat staring at wall for a long time. My career was built on principles that destroyed my father. Was paid very well to enforce policies that had erased his life's work. Gave presentations about how impact matters more than intent. About believing accusations even without evidence. About how protecting potential victims outweighs protecting accused. All of it had seemed so clear, so righteous. Now it was ashes. Seattle conference was in 2 weeks. Looked at presentation again. Really looked at it. Every slide was landmine. Section on how denial is typical response from guilty parties. My dad denied it. Was he typical? Guilty party. Section on believing survivors without requiring proof. What about believing my dad without requiring proof of his guilt? Section on how organizations must act decisively even with ambiguous evidence. Decisive action had destroyed innocent man. Couldn't give this presentation. Couldn't stand in front of hundreds of people and advocate for system that did this. But conference was major event. I was listed keynote speaker. Backing out now would damage my reputation, raise questions, spent days agonizing over what to do. Tried rewriting presentation to be more balanced. Include something about due process, false accusations, protecting the accused, but every attempt felt hollow, performative. Couldn't just add few slides about fairness and pretend that fixed anything. Finally made decision. Sent email to conference organizers withdrawing from speaking slot. Cited personal emergency, apologized for late notice. They were understanding, but I could read disappointment between lines. This would have been huge opportunity. These conferences are where reputations are built. Didn't care anymore. Same day, requested meeting with my boss. Director of HR. Woman I'd worked with for 5 years. Told her I needed to take leave of absence. Family emergency. Needed to be available for my parents. She approved it immediately. Said to take whatever time I needed. Asked if everything was okay, and told her my father was going through health crisis. Not technically lie. His mental health was certainly in crisis. She expressed sympathy, said family comes first. Walked out of office feeling untethered. First time in 8 years I wasn't directing diversity initiatives, giving presentations, conducting investigations. Drove to my parents' new apartment week later. They'd moved out of house into small 2-bedroom in cheaper part of town. The apartment was fine, but felt suffocating after spacious house they'd left. Boxes still stacked in corners. They downsized so much most furniture hadn't fit. Dad was sitting in kitchen when I arrived. Looked marginally better than Memorial Day. at least showered and dressed, but eyes still had that hollow quality. Mom hugged me hard, whispered thank you for coming. Spent afternoon just being there, not talking about anything important. Made dinner together, watched TV, normal family stuff. Dad was quiet but present, more engaged than last visit. After Mom went to bed, Dad and I sat in small living room. He started talking unprompted, said therapy was actually helping some. Didn't fix anything but gave him tools to get through days. Talked about what it was like to lose identity so completely. For 26 years, he was operations manager, leader, provider. People came to him with problems. He solved them. Now he was just unemployed guy in small apartment depending on his wife and daughter. Described the shame of it in detail that was hard to hear. But I listened without interrupting. Let him say everything he needed to say. Talked for 2 hours about every aspect of what he'd lost. Not just job and money, but sense of self, respect of community, confidence that world was fair place where hard work mattered, trust in institutions he'd believed in. When he finally stopped talking, we sat in silence. Then I did something I should have done months ago. Told him I believed him, completely, without reservation. That I knew he was innocent, and what happened was wrong. Saw his shoulders shake. He covered his face with hands. Moved to sit next to him, put my arm around him like he'd done for me countless times. He leaned against me and cried. Just sat there holding my dad while he cried. Felt like role reversal from every childhood hurt he'd comforted me through. When he composed himself, he asked me something that cut deep. Wanted to know if my work had prepared me for this. If all my expertise in HR and investigations helped me understand what happened to him. Had to sit with that question. Finally told him yes, it had prepared me. Just not in a way he meant. Said my work had taught me all the justifications for what they did to him, all the reasons why it was necessary and right, and protected the company. How I'd have conducted similar investigation myself and maybe reached same conclusion. That was what made this so devastating. I knew exactly how they'd destroyed him, because I'd been trained to do same thing. He looked at me for a long moment, asked if I still believed in that work. I couldn't answer right away. Thought about all the good I'd thought I was doing. Policies that protected real victims. Initiatives that helped underrepresented groups. Investigations that removed actual predators from workplaces. Those things were real and important. But so was this. So were the men I'd dismissed and mocked. The fathers who'd lost custody. The workers who'd lost careers. The suicide statistics I'd hand-waved away. Finally told Dad I didn't know what I believed anymore. That I'd been so certain and now nothing was clear. He nodded like he understood. Said, certainty is luxury, and he'd lost that too. We talked until late, really talked. He told me he didn't want me to abandon my principles completely. Said some of what I advocated for was right and necessary, but maybe there was room for more nuance. More consideration that people are complex and situations aren't always clear, that good people can be destroyed by well-intentioned systems. Asked me to just remember what happened to him. Carry it with me when making decisions about other people's lives. I promised him I would. Spent next few days helping them settle into apartment. Organized boxes, hung pictures, tried to make place feel like home. Watched Dad carefully. Noticed how he moved through space differently now. Tentative, smaller somehow. Man who used to fill room with presence now seemed to be trying not to take up space. Mom pulled me aside one morning while Dad was at therapy. Thanked me for being there and for believing him. Said it meant everything to Dad that I was on his side. Then asked me something I'd been dreading. Wanted to know if there was anything I could do professionally to help him. Some way to clear his name or challenge the termination. Had to tell her there wasn't. Company had followed process, made decision within their rights. Fighting it would require lawyers they couldn't afford and likely wouldn't succeed. His reputation was just gone. Saw hope drain from Mom's face. Realized she'd been holding on to idea that my expertise could fix this. That knowing how system worked meant I could work system for Dad, but I couldn't. All my knowledge and experience was useless to help him. Worse than useless, it let me see exactly how trapped he was. Returned to city end of July. Didn't go back to work yet. Leave was approved through August. Spent time alone in apartment thinking. Looked at career I'd built with new eyes. office full of awards and recognition for diversity work, articles I'd published in HR journals, speaking invitations from conferences. All of it felt tainted now. Not because work was wrong exactly, but because it was incomplete. I'd been so focused on one type of justice that I'd become blind to other injustices, so committed to believing victims that I'd stopped considering the accused might also be victims. Championed impact over intent, until intent meant nothing at all. Started reading things I'd previously dismissed, articles about false accusations, flawed investigations, destroyed lives, men's rights content I'd always categorized as misogynist whining. Some of it was still that, but some of it was real pain from real people, stories like Dad's repeated hundreds of times. Patterns I'd refused to see because they didn't fit my narrative. Found myself in weird limbo. Couldn't go back to believing what I'd believed before, but didn't know what to believe instead. Certainty was gone, replaced with uncomfortable ambiguity. September came, and had to make decision about work. Couldn't stay on leave forever, but couldn't go back and do job the way I'd done it before. Requested meeting with boss to discuss return. She was warm and welcoming, asked how my father was doing. Said he was managing, situation was still difficult. She expressed sympathy, then asked when I'd be ready to return full-time. Said I needed to discuss some concerns about my role. Her expression shifted to puzzlement. Told her I'd been doing a lot of reflection, that family situation had given me new perspective on some of our policies. Wanted to discuss implementing stronger protections for accused parties in investigations, more rigorous evidence standards, better due process. I watched her face close off. She reminded me that our priority is protecting victims and maintaining safe workplace. That's what company expects from diversity and inclusion department. Said of course, victim protection is important. But so is fairness to accused. We need balance. She looked at me like I'd suggested something radical. Asked if my father's situation was influencing my judgment, that perhaps I was too close to this and needed more time. Felt flash of anger but kept voice level. Told her my judgment was fine, that maybe being close to situation gave me valuable insight we'd been missing. She suggested we table this conversation until I was fully back, that we could discuss any policy concerns through proper channels, but tone made it clear what she thought of my concerns. Left meeting understanding my position had fundamentally changed. I couldn't do this work the same way, but company didn't want different way. Spent next week updating resume and reaching out to contacts. Not sure what kind of work I wanted to do, just knew it couldn't be this. Meanwhile, Dad's situation continued to deteriorate in new ways. Criminal charges were filed. One of accusers had gone to police, made formal complaint. District attorney was pursuing misdemeanor assault. Case based on allegation that Dad had inappropriately touched her shoulder and back. His lawyer said it was weak case, but DA was prosecuting anyway. Public sentiment about workplace harassment meant they had to be seen taking action. Dad now faced potential criminal record on top of everything else. Trial was set for November. Mom called crying almost daily. Legal fees were destroying what little savings they had from house sale. Dad was spiraling again, all progress from therapy evaporating. Started having nightmares, waking up, screaming. Doctor increased his medications, but nothing seemed to help. Idea that he might be convicted of crime was breaking him completely. Man who'd never gotten so much as speeding ticket facing assault charges. Went home again in October. Dad looked worse than ever. Weight loss was severe now, clothes hanging off him. Hands shook constantly, couldn't maintain eye contact. Told me he couldn't survive prison, said it with such flat certainty that ice ran through my veins. Wasn't exaggerating or being dramatic, was stating simple fact about his limitations. Spent whole visit trying to reassure him while feeling hollow inside. Lawyer thought they could win at trial but wasn't certain. Case would come down to credibility, his word against hers, and he was already marked as harasser by termination. Jury would see man fired for harassment now claiming innocence. Uphill battle didn't begin to describe it. Sat in on meeting with lawyer, calm professional woman who laid out strategy. They'd emphasize lack of physical evidence, character witnesses, his clean record, but she acknowledged that current climate made defending accused harassers nearly impossible. Juries wanted to believe women, Didn't want to be seen as dismissing victims. Standard of evidence was effectively reversed. Accused had to prove innocence rather than prosecution proving guilt. Listen to this and recognize my own talking points. How many times had I said we must believe women? That even being accused suggested guilt because women don't lie about this. I'd helped create climate that was now destroying my father. Not single-handedly, obviously. But my work, my presentations, my policies had contributed to an environment where accusation equals conviction, where men like my dad had no real defense. November brought trial. 3 days of testimony in county courthouse. Sat behind Dad in courtroom watching whole thing unfold. Accuser testified first. Young woman, maybe 25, nervous but credible. Described feeling uncomfortable when Dad complimented her appearance. Said he'd touch her shoulder when talking to her. Made her feel trapped. Claimed it happened regularly over several months. That she'd tried to avoid him, but he was her supervisor. Prosecution asked why she didn't report it sooner. She said she was afraid of retaliation, of not being believed. Said she only came forward when other women did, safety in numbers. Testified that it had affected her mental health, caused anxiety and stress. Had to listen to my dad being described as predator who abused power. Watched jury taking notes, nodding sympathetically. Defense cross-examined. Lawyer pointed out no witnesses to alleged touching. No complaints filed during employment. No documentation of any kind. Accuser maintained it happened. She just hadn't felt safe reporting. Dad testified next. Looked small and scared on witness stand. Voice shaking. Explained he may have complimented employees. Tried to be friendly boss. Build rapport with team. Might have put hand on shoulder occasionally in an encouraging way. Never meant anything inappropriate. Thought of employees like family. Prosecution tore into him. Suggested he was using age and seniority to exploit young women, that calling them family was grooming behavior. I heard my own words coming from prosecutor's mouth. Dad tried to explain himself, got flustered and confused, could see jury turning against him. Character. Witnesses helped some. Former colleagues who testified Dad was professional, kind, mentor to many. But prosecution noted these were all men. Suggested they'd benefited from same boys club culture Dad perpetuated. Trial concluded after 3 days. Jury deliberated for 6 hours. Came back with guilty verdict. Misdemeanor assault, sentenced to probation, mandatory counseling, fine, criminal record. Watched Dad's face when verdict was read. Something died behind his eyes. Final piece of him that believed in justice or fairness just extinguished. Mom grabbed my hand so hard it hurt. Left courthouse in silence. Took Dad home and he went straight to bedroom. Closed door. Mom and I sat in living room not speaking. What was there to say? Innocent man had been convicted because system I'd championed decided belief mattered more than evidence. Stayed with them for week after trial. Dad barely spoke. Moved through apartment like ghost. Stopped going to therapy. Said it was pointless. And stopped. Taking most of his medication. Mom was terrified to leave him alone. Asked if I could stay longer. Took extended leave from job. I was probably going to quit anyway. Days blurred together. Trying to keep Dad engaged, make him eat, convince him to keep living. Watching man who'd been my hero reduced to shell. Understood then what all those men I'd dismissed had felt. The ones who'd lost custody battles and killed themselves. Who'd lost jobs and spiraled into depression. Wasn't that they were weak or fragile. Was that being destroyed systematically by institutions while everyone watches is unbearable. Losing everything you built, everyone you trusted, all sense of justice is soul-crushing. Dad wasn't catastrophizing. He was living nightmare that I'd told other men was exaggerated. One morning in December, sat with Dad in small living room. He was staring out window at nothing. Started talking without prompting. Said he'd been thinking about all the years he worked at plant, all the times. He stayed late, came in on weekends, solved problems nobody else could, times he'd mentored younger workers, helped them advance. Christmas parties he'd organized, team-building events, safety initiatives, 26 years of memories. Now it was all rewritten, every interaction reinterpreted as sinister. Legacy wasn't dedicated worker and good boss. was predator who finally got caught. Ask me how you live with that. How you wake up every day knowing that's what people think. That your grandkids will Google your name and find criminal conviction, and that you can't even defend yourself because defending yourself proves guilt. Didn't have answer. Just sat there crying. He looked at me and said something I'll never forget. Told me he didn't blame me. That I'd been trying to make world safer for people like those women. Said he understood why I'd believed what I believed, but asked me to promise something. To remember that he was innocent. That when I went back to my work and my life, I'd carry this with me. Remember that people being accused are people. That evidence matters. That process matters. That truth matters. Promised through tears. He nodded and went back to staring out window. Sat there, understanding I'd been outsmarted by my own logic. Spent years building career on certainty that I was right. That my way was just and necessary. Built whole identity around being person, who didn't cave to male fragility, who centered victims and didn't let accused derail conversations. Now forced to watch those principles destroy the one man I loved most. Couldn't argue against the logic because it was my logic. Man who'd always supported me, who'd believed in my work even when it went against his interests. Was collateral damage of worldview I'd championed. And I had to live with that. Had to sit in an apartment watching him barely survive, knowing my career was built on framework that made this possible. No appeals left, no arguments to make. Just crushing weight of being exactly wrong and most painful way possible. Dad was innocent. System destroyed him anyway, and I'd spent years explaining why that was necessary.